And how the 2024 race looks so far. Philip Wegmann is a White House reporter for Real Clear Politics. Philip, very, very excited to talk to you. Okay, first I have to ask you this question. In terms of that interview, let's start with that, just because there's so much juicy, these are tidbits until we see the full interview. But saying that he kind of didn't know what the words desanctimonious meant, but former President Trump inferring that DeSantis believes that he is morally superior to other people, to other politicians, to other lawmakers. Do you think that he is going to come off as biting the hand that helped feed his political career?
That certainly is the risk here, because after all, in 2018, it was with Donald Trump's endorsement that DeSantis was able to leapfrog another Republican, the Florida Agricultural Commissioner Adam Putnam, in the race there for governor. But I think that what we're seeing currently is we're watching as DeSantis' stump speech is emerging. This book tour, these interviews that he's done, these are all sort of dress rehearsals for the eventual announcement. And I think that the contrast that he's creating is he says, look, there's no drama in my administration. I would have fired Dr. Fauci. I was a winner in the last couple of election cycles. That is fundamentally the difference between DeSantis and Trump. And that's the one that if he declares, he's going to want voters to focus on.
It'll be interesting to see how well liked he would be on a national stage compared to in Florida, where there are people who are wildly accepting of his policies. But let's take a look at the poll numbers. A new Monmouth University poll finds former President Trump is again leading DeSantis in terms of popularity, in terms of who Republicans want to see for president in 2024. 41% for Trump, 27% for DeSantis. At one point, they were tied. And then at another point, DeSantis was ahead 39% to 26%. But he's not even a candidate. So is this a distraction from the race until he officially throws his hat in the ring?
Well, I think you make such a good point. We're going to figure out whether or not the rest of the country looks like Florida or if it's an outlier. And I think that what that poll from Monmouth shows is that, yeah, Donald Trump, the former president, is absolutely the front runner. He is the establishment candidate as of now. And if the election was held tomorrow, he'd probably walk away with the nomination. But those are some solid numbers for DeSantis when he's not yet a candidate. And I think the thing that keeps Trump world up at night, what makes them nervous, is the possibility of DeSantis critiquing Donald Trump's record from the right. We've heard a lot of criticism of the former president from the left, but this will be the first time that another conservative will look at his record and say to conservative Republicans, here's where the former president got it wrong.
But DeSantis saying in that Piers Morgan interview that he believes he could beat Biden, but not going so far as to think he could beat Trump, at least not admit it. Let's look at these Fox News numbers. We have a poll from them, Trump leading at 43% to DeSantis's 28%. The other candidates not cracking double digits. Then there's the Quinnipiac poll showing former President Trump ahead by 14 points, but found 23% of voters hadn't heard enough to have an opinion about DeSantis versus just 2% who haven't heard enough about Trump. Because who's under that rock? So do you think that, do you think that Governor DeSantis should still keep playing this game? And I mean that with all due respect, because, again, in politics, it's really all about this war of words until you show and prove. But does he still have a chance to stand on his own and actually win a nomination even before we know if he's going to run?
Well, I think those numbers are shocking to a lot of people who are political junkies and follow the news cycle every single day, because DeSantis is very much a media darling for conservatives, right? There's a reason why audiences flock to Tucker Carlson or Ben Shapiro's show when DeSantis is a guest. The question is, though, is he going to be able to attract widespread star power, not just among, the diehard fans on the right? And so we're going to see, as he tries to figure out how he makes the case that he's the one to beat Biden, how does he deal with Donald Trump? And I think that the indictment could potentially change things the next couple of days. So could, a DeSantis announcement. But what I'm going to be watching for very carefully is how does DeSantis play outside of a friendly crowd. Some of those really critical retail political skills that he's going to have to put to test in early primary states. As he works the county fair, as he works the local diner, we're going to see what he's actually made of.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.